General Motors will pay $900 million to settle a criminal lawsuit filed by the U.S. Justice Department. The auto giant admits it covered up an ignition switch defect linked to more than 100 deaths. BC O'Neilly is live in Detroit with more for us tonight. Hi, BC.
Hi, Adam. Last year, General Motors issued a massive recall because of that ignition switch defect. And the automaker came under intense pressure because it was revealed that it waited years to report the problem. Today, the Justice Department says that GM put the public as well as its customers' safety at risk.
We are here this afternoon to announce the filing of criminal charges against General Motors Company.
Federal prosecutor Preet Bharara in New York making the announcement that General Motors faces wire fraud charges in the handling of ignition switch defects linked to at least 124 deaths and hundreds of injuries. At the same time, he said GM had agreed to settle the criminal case by paying $900 million to avoid prosecution.
In a case like this, as I think you'll agree, a case about public safety and about life and death, continued oversight is absolutely critical. So the resolution, as I said, includes detailed factual admissions by GM.
Those admissions include failing to tell regulators about the potentially fatal defect and that it misled consumers about the safety of the affected vehicles. GM recalled over 2 million vehicles last year when it was revealed some models could unexpectedly switch off, disabling brakes, power steering, and airbags. As long as GM abides by the agreement, after 3 years, the criminal charges will be dropped. The automaker also agreed to an independent monitor to oversee its recall and safety practices.
Just being charged with a crime for a large corporation can be a death sentence, and often is a death sentence. And so cooperation is what GM does in order to secure a deferred prosecution agreement, in order to secure a deal like this.
Prosecutors are not ruling out charging individuals in the future, and GM CEO Mary Barra promised that the company will change.
We let those customers down in that situation. We didn't do our job. And as part of our apology to the victims, we promise to take responsibility for our actions.
GM will also pay out $575 million to more than 1,300 people to settle many of the lawsuits filed by victims and their families. The settlements were met with frustration by victims' family members, like Laura Christensen, who last year said she hoped someone at General Motors would be held criminally responsible for the death of her daughter. Amber Marie Rose died in a 2005 crash caused by the ignition switch in her Chevrolet Cobalt.
We now know that GM employees knew about these dangerous and deadly defects and did nothing.
The agreement has spent on the defect to over $5 billion, a bill lawmakers said during hearings in Washington last year that could have been avoided. The part needed to fix the defective switches, they said, cost less than $1 per car.
And they decided not to do so because of cost. Now, Americans stepped up and they bailed out General Motors. And now General Motors needs to step up and make substantial corporate changes so nothing like this ever happens again.
Under the terms of the agreement, General Motors will be watched by an independent monitor, and it's also important to note that there were no charges brought against any current or former GM employees, but the Justice Department stressed today that that could always change. Adam?
BC, thank you. Bob Hilliard is the lead attorney for all of the personal injury and death cases caused by GM's defective ignition switch. He's joining us now via Skype from Corpus Christi, Texas. Bob, good to have you with us. How are the families reacting to this settlement?
They're shocked. They were convinced that the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York would take GM to the woodshed, would do what they thought was necessary in regards both to a fine, but more importantly to personal responsibility for specific individuals inside GM who participated in the cover-up. And GM was told to pay $900 million, which is less than the Toyota criminal settlement, and Toyota did less than GM did.
What kind of number do you think would have been more appropriate than 900 million?
$3 billion.
$3 billion. Would you say that GM got away pretty easily here?
I think GM is happy with this result. They put this behind them. You know, they have a net worth right now of $30 billion. They now are writing a check for $900 million. No one's going to go to jail. They are going to go on making cars and making money.
We put our hands in the lives of automakers every time we get behind the wheel. What kind of message do you think this settlement sends to the automakers?
Well, I'm concerned for tomorrow's victim of tomorrow's defect, because when you are inside an automobile company and you are pressured by the bean counters to cut corners, and you recall when you're making decisions that might kill or injure people that GM got away with paying $900 million and no one went to jail. GM has said that they have changed their policies, that they have turned over a new leaf. And again, they may be right. My fear is not so much about what GM's going to do tomorrow, because they hired a new CEO and they're saying that they're trying to do right. In that regard, however, you probably are aware that there are victims sitting inside the bankruptcy court who are barred from suing General Motors because of the 2009 bankruptcy. They suffered injuries and deaths just like many of the clients who are receiving this settlement did, but they were just simply unlucky enough to have their accident pre-09. A bankruptcy judge recently ruled the victims have no avenue inside the courtroom. The bankruptcy that GM went through will prevent them from ever pursuing GM in a court of law.
So many innocent lives lost in all this. Bob Hilliard, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.